welcome to the n-Lorem podcast series, a series that focuses exclusively on patients now referred to as having nano-rare mutations. I'm Stan Crooke, and I'm the founder, chairman, and CEO of n-Lorem. n-Lorem is a nonprofit foundation that I initiated in January of 2020. Our mission at n-Lorem is to take advantage of the technology we created at Ionis Pharmaceuticals, Antisense technology, or ASO technology, to discover, develop, and provide experimental ASO treatments to nano-rare patients, and to do that for free for life. Many of you know that in October we had our first annual meeting, and we called it the first Nano-rare Patient Colloquium. I'm learning how to pronounce that word still. Out of that meeting, there were quite a number of questions that we simply didn't have time to answer in the meeting. And so what we plan to do today is to take the opportunity to address some of those questions and perhaps others that will come along. And joining me today is Charissa Lipman. Charissa is one of our parents. She's a parent of a nano-rare child. And she'll be representing all those folks who didn't get a chance to ask their questions. So, Charissa, you've got a big responsibility here. We're looking forward to it. And it sounds like it should be a fun time. And so, Charissa, perhaps you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you come to be interested in nano-rare diseases.
Sure. Thank you, Stan, for having me here. My name is Charissa Lipman, and as Stan had mentioned, I am a parent of a nano-rare child. His name is Ryker, and he is a 7-year-old little boy who is joyful and absolutely loves music. What makes him nano-rare is a variant in the CACNA1A gene. It's CACNA1A. And essentially, it's responsible for excessive calcium influx into his brain cells. So it kind of causes like a hyperexcitability, which results in severe seizures, as well as severe hemiplegic migraines, and ataxia, among other life-altering conditions. But despite all of this that he has on his plate, he's a happy little boy who just loves meeting each day and each challenge with a smile, which is just so inspirational to me. And we are just truly grateful to be given this opportunity with n-Lorem, and it's wonderful to be here.
Thanks, Charissa. So when did you become aware that something was wrong?
It was kind of an exciting adventure. Before we became aware of Ryker's diagnosis, 24 hours before his birth, I was unfortunately involved in a car accident, which had overturned my vehicle and induced a little early labor. When we began noticing a little bit of floppiness and whatnot, we kind of attributed it to perhaps maybe there was some sort of trauma that happened as a result from that. But at 4 months, he had his first seizure. We went to the hospital because it was a status seizure, so it was not stopping on its own, and his oxygen was dipping rather low. And it took a lot of effort to really get that seizure to stop, and we remained in the hospital for about a week, having all of the tests done and all of them coming back normal, which is a very common story that you hear with usually genetic causes of nano-rare diseases. So we left the hospital understanding that we were still awaiting genetic results. When we got those results, it was for the mutation in the CACNA1A gene. It was a little bit of a relief to get a diagnosis, but at the same time, there was virtually nothing known about it, especially in regards to epilepsy. So it was a little bit of a scary blind path that we traveled for the first few years, trialing medications and just trying to connect with other families who may have, a similar mutation. We were actually so lucky to find another parent who has the exact same nano-rare mutation that Ryker has. And so you can imagine that we bonded pretty well. It's been a crazy journey. And our epileptologist had mentioned this opportunity with n-Lorem. And it was the first time that we really had hope for a treatment, because everything is just really a sorry excuse to control seizures and hemiplegic migraines, and nothing is really out there to treat the ataxia. So it really gave us hope. And it's amazing because it treats the root cause, which is so important in such a complex disease.
It is a fairly common, but it never ceases to be a tragic story for me to listen to, and the importance of hope. And so we're happy to have you as a part of the family, and we hope that we can help. Watching your child seize and watching your child have terrible pain and all that takes it out of you, I know. Certainly did me during my son's early years. So I appreciate that. Did you have any scientific or medical training at the time in your background at all?
I do. So I'm a dental hygienist. Because of that, I have a basic working knowledge of medical terminology and just understanding how these things work. And when, especially on a cellular level, when they started to describe like what exactly his mutation does, one of the first things I started doing was just as much research and reading as I possibly could, because you really have to be the advocate for your child, especially in a nano-rare community, because you're the one teaching the clinicians and the treating physicians what direction they should kind of go in and what they should look at, because you're the one who's done some of the most research on your child's condition. So it's been very helpful, having that background.
Just having the basic vocabulary and the reflexes to understand that science is about probability and not certainty, and all of that, which I think takes many people a lot of effort to come to terms with. So, I mean, again, knowledge is power, and so many of our families do not have the basic knowledge. And so one of my really important goals in doing this podcast series is to give people the basic knowledge so they can exercise the power that they should have. We'll continue our work, and we're moving toward treatment, so we look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess we better get down to business now. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, and you represent all those people who had questions and didn't get them answered. So you're up.
All right, Stan. So we definitely got a good amount of questions in, and I know we're going to start off by highlighting a few of them and then take it from there, depending on our time. Looks like one of the first questions that we chose to highlight says, as you are successful in discovering and developing individualized ASOs for nano-rare patients, do you envision creating a library of ASOs that would be available to patients across the world? I thought this was a really good question.
It is. And it's something that I thought fairly deeply about before I started n-Lorem. And the answer is, of course, we are. That library of ASOs grows almost every day, because we've filed more than 10 INDs last year, and this quarter alone, we'll file 5 more. And so as we gain experience with those ASOs and those patients, they become tools that could help others. And so we're investing more and more time in trying to make everyone aware of the genes we're working on, the ASOs that we have, and seeking out physicians and patients who can be helped with the ASOs we already have. It's a challenge today that I'm hopeful will get easier, because it's more than just finding the patient. It's also finding a center, a physician, all of the elements that are necessary to get a patient cared for, even if we have an ASO. We're also developing a lot of experience in what it feels like when an ASO works and how we measure all that and so on. And so being able to give new patients the opportunity to benefit from our pioneer patients, what we learned in our pioneer patients, is, I think, another important attribute of what we're doing, and certainly something that's going to expand over the coming years. So the short answer, which I should give first, is yes, we are developing that library, and we have worked very hard to make that library available in a way that functions and gets quality care for future patients.
That's great. Very comprehensive response, Stan. Let's see, moving on to our next question. For disease organization patient advocacy groups that have several patients with the same mutation, should they apply for treatment as a group or should they apply separately?
This is a question we've encountered quite a number of times, and n-Lorem is established to change the world one patient at a time. That's our mission. That is the most poetic expression of our mission. And so we respond to applications. And so what we recommend is that each patient, physician, dyad apply independently. But obviously, if the association or disease association or disease group is helping these patients, take advantage of what's being learned as these applications are put together and help each other get them filed. We do not prioritize other than by urgency. I think that's really important. We want everyone who comes to n-Lorem to be treated in an equitable fashion. So file. And the association should work with the individual parents, patients, and physicians to facilitate those filings. And we're seeing that happen more and more. It's a slow process. This whole 4 years has been about teaching the world that these problems exist and that there are potential solutions and what our process is. We have some more education to do, but that's the way we handle it. One patient at a time, at our best, every single day to help that patient. The other thing to remember is even if you have the same mutation, the phenotype can be different. We're in the process of publishing information that shows how different they can be, and I presented some of that at our colloquium. And therefore, each patient has to be considered individually because each patient is an individual. It's fascinating for someone who's thought about populations of patients his whole career and making drugs for populations to teach people how to change their thinking and realize that when you move to an individual patient, understanding what afflicts that patient and what's most important to improve in that patient are critical determinants of what we do and how we do it. Facilitate each other's application, but we will consider each application as we receive it in the context of what that patient needs.
I'm really glad you had mentioned, about the colloquium, because one of the things, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I remember hearing about that was that developing an ASO for an individual patient with the same mutation as a separate patient doesn't mean that that same ASO would in fact work for that separate patient. So that's why it's so important to treat the cases separately, because they're so individualized and there's other genetic components that could be influencing the expression of phenotypes and whatnot.
Absolutely. And one of our goals is to understand the molecular biology that's explaining that. We have the opportunity to do that for the first time really in history. In some cases, the same ASO will work. In many cases, that's true. But in some cases, when we call this alloselective ASOs, where we can only affect the diseased or the mutated 2 copies of the gene and 2 copies of RNA, and in that case, it's almost certain that the ASO will be slightly different because we make the ASO not to the pathogenic mutation, but to a non-pathogenic mutation. That brings me to a question that I've been asked, and that's what's a SNP? And let me answer that question before I move on, because we'll be using that term, I think, as we go forward. One of the problems I have with scientists and the way we communicate is we like big words when small ones would actually be better. SNPs stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. Okay, so what does that mean? A single nucleotide, that's each nucleotide is a genetic letter, poly, many, shapes, morphism. So rather than saying a single mutation in a single nucleotide, we say single nucleotide polymorphisms, which makes it sound like it's really complex and we sound very smart. It's not. You just happen to have a mistyped letter, a genetic letter, and that's all it is. But the thing to remember is that we're all an assembly of mistakes. Nobody likes to hear that, but we're all just, random collections of all these genetic mistakes that have been made over the centuries. Each human being will have 100 million or 200 million or more SNPs, individual mutations. Most of them don't cause disease, and they're called silent mutations. And so we take advantage of those mutations that don't cause disease to design ASOs when we need to just knock out the mutant RNA and not the normal RNA. So SNP, single nucleotide polymorphisms, just say it's a mutation in a genetic letter.
It's a good way to sum it up.
It's not hard.
The next question, it's a little bit longer, so I'm happy to repeat any parts of it. This one comes from a Nano-rare family member. I have never been so inspired in an opening address as what was provided at the 2023 colloquium by Stan Crooke. Given the mission of n-Lorem, I don't understand how any researching neurologist or researcher in that space would not want to be a part of the absolute forefront of what n-Lorem is doing. Why do you think there is such an obstacle to being a part of an organization that has for the first time an opportunity to move the needle in such a meaningful way?
Well, first, thank you for the kind words. It's easy to be eloquent about our mission. And it's easy to be passionate about it because these are human beings in need. I mentioned in the colloquium, it's the biggest shock I've had in doing n-Lorem, how difficult it is to identify tertiary care, that is medical centers and physicians capable and willing to do this. To be blunt, I think it's principally money. We can't pay for clinical trials. We're not developing a drug for a patient population, and we have limited funds, so we are unable to pay. And most of the time when a company comes and says, we'd like you to enroll a patient in a clinical trial, that's an organization developing it commercially, and there's a lot of money associated with that. We don't do that. There are financial and risk impediments in these institutions that get in the way of getting this done. And it's very frustrating. In addition, this is so novel that I think there really isn't research funding for this yet. And we're working very hard to educate many others about the extraordinary research opportunity that there is. And so these investigators have their own research interests, and this isn't one of them. And so you're talking to a person who has to get grants, has to publish his work, for his career. And you're saying, well, look, I've got all my research interests and this lies outside of it. No, thanks. And so there's just a lot of work to get done. That's the nature of being at the leading edge. And while it's annoying and frustrating and surprising, I'd rather be at the leading edge doing this and dealing with that than standing on the sidelines and watching people suffer.
Do you believe that some of it could be a hesitancy to assume responsibility because it's such a novel treatment?
Some. The technology has been fully validated. There are now so many ASOs that have been approved commercially, and at Ionis alone, I think we've treated 500,000 patients in clinical trials. But that doesn't mean everyone knows it. And these are novel experimental medicines being developed in a way that's never been done before. So by definition, there is risk. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there were physicians who simply weren't willing to accept that risk. We do our best to help them, again, educate them. We provide reviews of the technology and all of the information that we have. But if they're unwilling to even consider it, then that becomes a very difficult situation for us. I think that's a relatively minor component of the challenges we've run into. I think the challenges are mostly risk and money. And we're working on solving some of those problems, but it really just boils down to us raising more money. And, we're doing it, but it takes some time.
How would you describe the partnership between n-Lorem and the sponsoring clinician scientist? And this is a two-part question. Also, what should patients expect from each side?
I think a true way to describe what we're actually doing is we're creating a network of nano-rare research and treatment centers with n-Lorem at the hub, accepting challenges, creating the ASOs and providing the ASOs to those treating centers. The responsibility of the physician or principal investigator, we'll call him that because we like abbreviations in science, we say PIs. Okay, so it's not a private investigator, it's a principal investigator. So the principal investigator's primary responsibility is to take care of that patient and to make, in consultation with the patient or parents, decisions that are right for that patient. In these centers, typically the patient is sequenced, the genetics sequenced, and then either at that center, or sometimes we do it, we sort out the nature of the mutation and we make sure that it's really causative. So all that has to happen before we can make a decision to treat. And then once we provide the ASO, it's the responsibility of the investigator to administer the ASO according to the protocol, collect data so that we can then learn from that patient and assess whether the patient is getting better or worse. In the end, n-Lorem makes no decisions about treatment of a patient. We can make recommendations, but it is entirely, the final decision is the province of the physician, the patient, and the family. And so, to my mind, the roles are very clearly demarcated and appropriate. And as we expand this network, what I look at is the halo it creates of hope and help. And the larger that network, the bigger that halo of benefit and hope and aspirations for a better life. In that sense, is that we're at a very exciting stage because we have quite a number of centers already. What I hope over the next couple of years that we'll quadruple those centers. And of course, every center that we add becomes a new center of hope.
It's really important for patients and patient families to kind of understand the roles and expectations.
There are also limits that we have. For example, we answer questions from patients and parents that are generic, but if it's specific to that patient, we believe the right way for that communication to take place is from the physician. And so we provide the information to the physician, but we don't feel that it's our prerogative to speak directly and insert ourselves in between the treating physician and the patient. That relationship is so important to protect. And so we're very cautious about how we communicate with patients and family.
So moving on to our next question. This one's a little bit shorter.
Good. That doesn't mean my answer will be shorter.
I thought you would appreciate that. So this question asks, what do you mean by an optimized ASO?
An optimized ASO is an ASO discovered and developed by somebody who knows something. ASO technology now, after 33 years of my life, sounds kind of simple to do. It's not. These are really complex drugs, and you really need to know what you're doing, and you need to go through every step that we have described at length in various publications and at the colloquium. And so an optimized ASO is an ASO that has been rigorously tested through every step that we recommend and analyzed by people who have experience in looking at these drugs. With all the new companies involved and all the new labs, that knowledge and experience is broadening. But today, the real experience resides at Ionis and at n-Lorem. It's like any other tool that you use, the quality of the tool matters. And here, the quality of a drug that's being administered to a very sick patient obviously matters.
This next one asks, Would you expect to see better results from ASO treatment in patients who are younger versus older?
No, I don't think age is necessarily relevant. What I would say is very relevant is how advanced the disease is. As a general rule with regard to any treatment of any disease, the earlier in the progression of the disease one can treat, the better. It's just that simple. One of our real goals is to introduce genomic sequencing into all newborns. And when we do that, then we'll have the opportunity to get to these patients earlier before they become so sick. With Spinraza, of course, that was our drug to treat SMA. We began by treating the very sickest patients. And as we advanced, we were able, because we had the safety and the benefit and so on, we were able to conduct trials in patients before they became symptomatic. And most of those patients are growing up like normal, healthy children. So there is real value in getting to the patient earlier in the course of the disease, not necessarily in the context of age of the patient.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned universal newborn sequence. That was something that I had heard at the colloquium. I believe it was when Kristen Stevenson was speaking, who's with St. Jude. She had said that she would love for that to be a goal, universal newborn sequencing. And, the sooner you identify an issue, the better, the better the outcome. And it sounds so simple, but I'm sure it's a gargantuan task to take on. It stuck with me. I thought, man, that would be such an amazing change to make.
Well, the sharp end of the spear is always treatment. And when you have treatment, it really, or potential treatment, it gives you a great deal more leverage to introduce genetic tests or whatever the test is. Sequencing all newborns is already happening in some parts of the world. The UK, UAE, Singapore, others are already starting it. And there are lots of people like me who strongly believe that this is something that must happen if we're going to change the way we think about health and disease altogether, which it's time. And so it will happen, not nearly as fast as I want it to, but it's going to happen. It has to be done properly with respect for the individual and avoiding misuse and abuse of the information. But my goodness, the first thing is to figure out what might be wrong and get to that patient before it goes wrong if we can.
Before more damage is done.
Every day that a mutation is expressed is a day that it is doing damage to cells. You may not see it, but it's there. It's doing damage. And as that damage accumulates, it becomes harder and harder to treat.
So this next question asks about the FDA. And the approval process. The FDA has certain designations for program review, for instance, fast track and orphan. Is there anything like that for nano-rare patients?
No. All of those designations are focused on a drug being approved for commercial use. We are giving our drugs away and they're not planned for commercial use. The guidance for nano-rare treatment is unique to nano-rare. And we are very pleased that the FDA was as committed to helping these patients as we. We provided lots of comments about what we thought should be in the guidance, and we're very pleased with the guidance. And I've been very pleased with the behavior of the FDA. Just because you have guidance doesn't mean every division will follow it and every reviewer will follow it. But certainly the FDA is doing its job. It asks us questions. It checks what we're doing. It does all the right things. But we've now filed INDs in 4 different divisions and had approvals. And it's very clear that the FDA is anxious to do as much as it can to help these patients. And so I think that's great news for the nano-rare community. But there are no designations like fast track or that whatnot, because we're not seeking commercial approval.
Here's a question about streamlining n-Lorem's operations, which you have referenced in some of your previous questions. It says, I realize that there was significant work done in 2023 to streamline n-Lorem's operations. Which process in the workflow do you believe can still be optimized to help streamline patient programs?
Probably every step in the process. Remember, this is all new. Nobody's ever done this before. So every step of the way we learn. We are actively looking at refining our screening systems and quantitating our screening systems and asking, do we need to do every step? Do we need to do as many ASOs at each step? How can we make this more efficient? Of course, we built our own lab and recruited our own staff. And that's vastly more efficient than depending on even, we paid people at Ionis and they were great, but it's much better to have our own group doing this and the urgency that comes from a single mission, which is to help a patient. We're really working hard to expand our network. The first step is to get a place where these patients can be treated. And without that, we can't help a lot of patients. And there are patients going untreated because we haven't. So we're doing a lot of work at that end. And then on the development side of things, expanding the number of centers that are able and willing to do this for us, getting lower costs out of all those organizations, and reducing the time that we wait between steps are all things that we're working on. That's going to be a work in progress. No process is ever perfect, and it's our job to make it better and better, and that will save us money, allow us to treat more patients, and it will allow us to get to patients more rapidly, all of which are important goals for us.
And springboarding off of that last question, has there been a change at all in the amount of time it takes to process a patient and develop an ASO since it began and since you've streamlined?
A bit. We are doing things more rapidly and better. But on the other hand, we also discovered that, for example, we had thought that we would not need to do sterile fills of vials. The drug goes into a vial and has to be sterile because we thought the hospital pharmacist would do it at the hospital pharmacy. It turns out that most won't do that anymore. And that adds somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 and another 8 to 12 weeks. All the streamlining we did got consumed by just that new step that we had to add. To my mind, it's amazing we get to patients within 15 to 18 months or thereabouts to begin with. And our goal is to trim that both in terms of cost and time as much as we can. And we'll be working on it over the next few years.
It really is a learning process.
It is.
This next question relates to how patients come to n-Lorem. Do you reach out to the correct patients, which presumably need to have ASO-able genetic mutations?
No, we don't. We don't think that's our role. We think that's the proper role of the treating physician, the institutions that were created to diagnose and treat patients. We're not a medical center and we're not the treating physician. We are dependent on the treating physician and patient and parent submitting applications to us. What we are doing is spending a lot of time and energy making sure that the world knows that we exist. I think we made a lot of progress there, but again, we're only 4 years old and we're doing something that before we did it was considered impossible. So it takes a while to educate people. I think it's very important for us to understand our role and what our role is not. And our role is not to make a diagnosis, to be the treating physician or an institution taking care of a patient. That has to be separated from us.
And I think that's a really important clarification to make and for people to understand. So speaking of educating and training, we have another question that references that. Do you have any activities or ongoing projects that would help educate and train physicians who might be interested in participating with n-Lorem?
Well, we publish quite a number of scientific papers, and that will get more and more. We give, I don't know, last year we probably gave 300 presentations. A lot of that, that's the way the scientific community basically educates itself. I think longer term, this is a much bigger question than n-Lorem, and that is, how do physicians, residents, fellows actually get trained into what we are actually entering, which is the era of genomic medicine. And I think that's a big challenge. And I know that many learned societies are wrestling with that. I know that medical schools are changing their curricula to try to deal with that. But I think that's going to be a long process. I think as it progresses, what we'll see is much greater use of more current and more immediate teaching tools, such as podcasts. So a physician who needs to get caught up on what a riboseq method is, there are now all kinds of sort of things you can get on the internet and learn that. We're doing what we can to make sure people know about us, but the job of changing the way physicians are educated and the way they think about health and disease is a much bigger job than we can tackle. And that's a big topic in the entire field of medicine and science.
Thank you, Stan. I think what I'm going to move on to next is talking about, I think, what's on everybody's mind, which is the next colloquium. Because I'm sure Amy has been planning the next one since the first one ended. So much planning goes into it, and she's done such a great job. It's amazing. And I'm really curious to hear, and I'm sure many of the listeners are too, about what's on the agenda next.
Well, we've just about finalized the date. It will be in Boston, and Biogen will host it again for us, and we thank them for that. They're wonderful partners, and we'll be announcing the date very soon. Almost immediately after the colloquium, I sent a long note to everybody with my thoughts about what we should do this year, and told them to keep track of it because I knew I'd forget. So we're moving along in the planning for it. And very excited about having it, and look forward to having a larger audience on site and a larger electronic audience and many more patients and families. Every one of us felt privileged to have so many wonderful families join us. And I thought one of the really important moments in the colloquium was the patient panel. It's important that everyone know that it's the patient that matters and that they're not alone, that there are others who are suffering with you, I guess is the best term, or at least sharing the challenges with you. Maybe that's a better way of expressing it.
Yeah, I have to say that was so special to be able to meet other families in person and just see, I mean, the wide variety of backgrounds of the parents and of the patients, the children that were there, and just being able to share their stories. It was really special. And, it really struck me how invested everyone at n-Lorem is in the patients at every level. They're so personally invested. It was just, it really blew me away. And it was so amazing to see in person. And I know it's so hard for families of nano-rare patients to be able to travel, but if there's any way you think you can make it happen, I really encourage it, because it's such a special thing to be a part of. And the people that I met and spoke with, I'll never forget those conversations. And I feel like I'm still processing it, Stan. It was that amazing. And I'm really looking forward to the next colloquium.
Me too. It was a privilege for us. And, the people who are at n-Lorem are here because of the mission. And the commitment to the mission is what drives. And the mission is another human being. The other thing that I really was pleased with, and I'm not sure that people who aren't trained in science and medicine appreciate it fully, is the seniority and support of the extraordinarily senior leaders that we had at that meeting. Senior leaders across the board, and to have Chris Wiebacher, who's a busy CEO of Biogen, sit through most of the meeting and participate in the reception the night before and so on, again, speaks to the heart of what we're doing.
I definitely felt that when I was there.
We were pleased with the meeting. You know, it was our first one. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, and we all felt like we didn't mess up anyway. and I think the next one will be even richer, and we'll have a lot more information to share about what treatment feels like, what it looks like, how we're doing it, and I think that's going to be one meaningful difference. I'm hopeful we can get FDAers to come. They're often reluctant to do that, but we're a nonprofit. On the other hand, we're making drugs that they supervise, and so we asked them last time and they didn't come, but we'll see again, and we'll see if we can get anybody to come from the FDA.
That would be a very interesting element to add on top of the already almost overwhelming list of people, speakers, topics, everything. It was amazing. So yeah, I'm excited to hear more information about it as it trickles out, as Amy's able to plan. And
yeah, sometime in the very near future, we'll be letting everybody know, and then we'll be putting the program together. And certainly the FDA was strongly supportive of the meeting, but you know, they have a set of rules that they really have to be careful and follow. So we'll see if we can get somebody from the FDA.
Fingers crossed. This last question, it's a little bit on the long side, Stan, so bear with me. The question states, say a patient is denied from n-Lorem because at the time of their application, the Access to Treatment Committee declares that the program is not amendable to the current technology and/or ASO strategies. But new data technology comes out that suggests that the patient's program has revived potential. Will the ATTC automatically reassess the case, or does a physician have to reapply the patient to n-Lorem?
Really, really important question. So the first thing to say about that is that antisense technology is still advancing. And I've led personally a lot of the advances, and am leading advances now. And so we're looking forward to new mechanisms and alternative approaches that will make both what we do better and also expand the number of types of patients we can treat. As that happens, what we're doing and what we will do on a sort of constant basis is go back and look at any cases that were rejected because they weren't amenable to antisense, and then see if we think they might be. That won't need ATTC. We'll just look at it internally, and if we conclude that that's the case, we'll try to get in touch with the treating physician, the submitting physician, see if they would still be interested if the patient is still amenable to being treated, and then we can go from there. Technology evolves slowly in the medical space, but antisense is still advancing. And so there will be broader opportunities as we go forward. And we're intending to make those opportunities available to the people who applied and got said no to, as well as the people who haven't applied yet. Sure, absolutely.
All right, great, Stan. Well, thank you so much for answering all of the questions that came in, and I'm sure people are looking forward to hearing them from all the way back in October.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you. Hopefully I answered the questions. And if we have additional questions that need to be answered, we can always do another podcast. It's fun to answer the questions for me. It gives me a chance to talk, I guess. That brings us to the conclusion of this podcast. Stay tuned, everyone. There are lots more podcasts coming. This will just take its place among them. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Stan.
n-Lorem is a nonprofit committed to discovering and providing personalized experimental treatments for free, for life, to patients with genetic diseases that affect 1 to 30 patients worldwide, referred to by n-Lorem as nano-rare. Many of these patients progress and die without ever achieving a diagnosis. This is where n-Lorem comes in. They do the impossible, by providing hope, and for those that they can help, free lifetime treatment. For more information about n-Lorem or today's episode, visit n-Lorem.org. Any questions can be sent into podcast@n-Lorem.org. Search n-Lorem on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook to connect with us. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allows others to find the show. This podcast is hosted by Dr. Stan Crooke. Our videographer is John Magnuson of Mighty One Productions. Our producers are John Magnuson and Kira Deneen of DNA Today. Thank you for listening.